Welcome to your first pair of pointe shoes. Before we start sewing the pointe shoes, we'll talk about the different parts of the pointe shoe. The stiff part of the body of the pointe shoe is called the box. The tip of the pointe shoe is the flat bottom of the pointe shoe, the part you stand on, and this hard sole is called the shank. Now every pair of pointe shoes needs to be very snug and fit very well for each individual dancer. That's why they do not come with ribbons and elastics already attached to them. We need to make sure the shoes fit properly just for your foot and nobody else's. So you're going to sew the ribbons and elastic on yourself. Now you should have gotten one set of ribbons and 2 sets of elastic. Now the elastics you're going to fold each set in half and cut it in half. So you end up with 4 pieces of elastic. Now what you want to do is slide the shoe onto your foot and take a piece of half of elastic and measure it from this seam to the opposite heel. And however long that is, to pull that nice and snug to your foot is how long you want to cut it. You may want to have your mother or a friend mark it with a marker or a pen to show how long it needs to be. And then you want to cut it to that length. So the half of the elastic that you have will probably be too long, and you'll need to make it shorter depending on your foot. Now you want to do the other elastic and take it from the opposite side across your heel and mark and cut that one as well. And then make sure all 4 pieces of elastic get cut to the size of your own foot. Now the ribbons you can cut into 4 pieces. So you can take the full length of ribbon that you get, cut that in half, and then fold each half in half and cut it in half again. So in the end, you should end up with 4 pieces of ribbon, not 2. Then you want to have a parent help with you with this. The ribbons fray a lot. They come apart at the edges very, very easily. So what we actually do is we sear the end of the ribbons with a little bit of flame. So what you want to do is have that nice fresh cut on your ribbon, and then take a lighter or a match. A lighter is a lot easier, so you won't burn your fingers. And you're just going to sear the end of the ribbon just for a second with that lighter. You don't want to get it black, but you'll see it just forms a nice hard crust. It's very easy to see. And that way, every time you put on your ribbons and tie and untie them, you won't be unraveling the ribbon as you go. All right, now we need to start sewing the ribbons and elastic on. Now they do sell sewing kits for the pointe shoes because you want a really strong thread and a really strong needle. They're actually quite thick to sew through. Myself, I've been doing this a long time. I actually just use unwaxed dental floss. It's hard to find unless you go to an actual pharmacy like a CVS, a Walgreens, or a Rite Aid. But you can also just use unwaxed dental floss. And then I usually like to get something similar to an embroidery needle, a big thick needle with a large hole that makes the dental floss easier to thread. And then I like to double my dental floss as well because there's a lot of pressure put on the ribbons and elastic, so we want to make sure that they don't break easily. So what I do is I double up the dental floss on the needle and gather them both together at the very end, and then make a little knot just by wrapping it around my finger and twisting it off the finger, and you pull and you get a nice solid knot on that dental floss. So you're going to start with 1 ribbon, the shiny side out, and 1 piece of elastic, and you're going to join those together. So you have them both together, both ends are the same there. And you're going to put the ribbon and elastic right on with the front of the ribbon and elastic on the front of the seam of the pointe shoe. So right there at the middle. You don't want it forward of the seam. You want it to start at the seam and go backwards. So your edge is on the seam. Now you're going to make just a few big loops of stitching. It doesn't have to be real exact or messy. So I go from the inside, and I'm just going to I like to do 2 on each side of the ribbon and elastic. It gives me enough security, keeps that ribbon nice and in place, but it allows me to sew the pointe shoes quickly. As you get older and you dance more, you can go through a pair of pointe shoes a week or even a day, so you need to get fast at sewing the pointe shoes. So I've sewed a lot of pointe shoes and it's made me very quick. So I did 2 stitches on that side. I turn it and do 2 stitches on the end of the ribbon and elastic, going right through that lining of the shoe, that white lining of the shoe. Now I'm going to go on to the other side and do 2 stitches. This is where the needle, thick needle, comes in handy because of that seam is a very thick fabric, and you need to get through all of that. Then what I like to do is flip that over and come here to the outside of the shoe, so that where you see that gap right there, I want to get rid of that gap. So what I do is I just go through and I catch the very, very top so that I don't catch the drawstring. We need to be able to still move that drawstring and tighten that drawstring. So I just go through the very, very top of that edging that they put on and put a couple little stitches in, catching both a little ribbon and a little elastic and a little piping, so that now it's attached right there. Then I'm just going to go back through both the ribbon and elastic to the other side. So I'm back on the inside of the shoe to finish it off. I go through one more time just to make sure I'm nice and secure. And then I'm going to make a couple little loops to tie it off. So I just take a tiny little stitch so that I get a loop that I can thread my needle through and tie it off. Then I'm going to do that one more time. It doesn't have to look really good. Nobody's going to see it from close up. So you just want it to be secure. It doesn't need to be fancy. And I'm going to tie the second one off and cut off that dental floss. Now I'm going to do exactly the same thing to the other side. So I'm going to do both sets of ribbon and elastic joined together. Again, ribbon on one side, shiny side out, elastic on the other. Elastic is going to go towards the inside of the shoe, so the ribbon is the outermost thing when you're sewing it on. Elastic, then ribbon, then inside of the shoe. So I'm going to do the same exact thing. I'm going to do the front edge of the ribbon elastic right on that seam of that point shoe, working my way a little bit back from there so it's not too far forward on the foot. It should end up falling about right about the center of your arch of your foot. You're going to, right in the middle of your foot, 2 stitches on each side. So I'm just working my way in a U shape around that ribbon and elastic. Now I'm going to go up the other side, pull it nice and taut. Don't get loose in those stitches. You want them nice and snug. Remember, they're going to have a lot of pressure put on those stitches because that's your arch of your shoe. You're going to be bending against that. So you want to make sure this is really secure stitching. Again, I'm going to come around to the outside between that ribbon and piping around along the edge of the shoe. And I'm just going to catch a little ribbon, a little elastic, and a little piping. Again, another place that having a nice heavy duty needle helps out a lot because it's hard to get through all of those fabrics and especially that elastic. And then I'm going to come back to the inside, going to make my final stitch on the inside. And then I'm going to make some little stitches so that I can tie the whole thing off. So I'll make a little stitch, thread my thread back through the hole, and another little stitch to thread that thread back through to make a nice solid knot and cut it. Now I need to sew the back of the elastics on. So let's check where we're at. So we've got a ribbon and elastic attached on each side of the shoe, starting at the seam and working our way back with the elastic on the inside and the ribbon on the outside. Now you are done at this point with the ribbons. You do not need to do anything with them. You just need to cross this elastic and bring it over the top of that arch for that nice snug fit. So where does the elastic go? Well, the easiest way to determine that is actually to fold down the back of the shoe So you're almost at the top of the shank. It kind of will naturally fold that way. You won't even have to try very hard. And then what I do is I take a little marker and I mark inside the shoe, right in that little crease. I make a little mark on each side, and that will give me a guideline to where I want to, the mark's not very dark, but where I want to put that elastic on either side. So I get that all marked up so it's ready to go. All right, and I dropped my needle and thread. Okay, so now I'm going to take this elastic. I'm going to take the elastic from one side and I'm going to cross it over to the other side. And I'm going to put the front of the elastic, so the part closest to the tip, at that mark. So the mark will meet this front edge of the elastic. So the part of the elastic is closest to the tip of the shoe. And I'm going to have it on a diagonal like that, because it's going to come diagonally across the top of the shoe. Now you can sew this on the inside of the shoe, but I like to sew it on the outside of the shoe. It's really tight back there towards the heel. So this way, if you sew it on the outside of the shoe, you don't have to futz around with trying to get your fingertips in there. And again, people don't look at the shoes particularly close up since we're on stage. For performances, sometimes I like to put it on the inside so it looks a little nicer, but for classwork, I always put it on the outside. And especially when it's your first time sewing the shoes, it's easier to work with it on the outside, and it's probably a good idea so you can see what you're doing. So I'm just putting it on the outside of that shoe. I did the exact same thing I did with the ribbons and elastics. Put a couple stitches, 2 on this side, 2 on the bottom, 2 on the other side. Now I'm just going to take that needle, I'm going to push it through the shoe back to the inside, so then when I tie it off, I will tie it off on the inside. I'll make my 2 little tiny loops on the inside that I thread that needle back through to make my knots. So I just make 2 little stitches. That gives me a loop that I can stick that needle through and pull it tight. All right. So now you can see a little bit better how I did that. So it came from the opposite side of the shoe, and then I sewed it on a diagonal to the outside here. And now I've got to get a little bit more denim floss to finish that last side of the shoe. And those big needles certainly help for trying to get that dental floss through there easily. I'm going to tie it off the same way I tied it off before. So I have a nice knot, roll it up at the bottom, wrap it around my finger and roll it up. Same thing I did before. Front end of the elastic goes right where that mark was I made it. Place it on a diagonal. Start on the inside of the shoe, so your knot's on the inside, that way you don't have to look at it. So I just started on the inside and pulled it all the way through to the outside and put 2 stitches on each side. First on the side of the elastic, then I'm going to go 2 stitches on the bottom. They can be nice big loopy stitches as long as they're tight. They do not have to be little stitches. 2 on the opposite side, and my last one's going to go all the way back through again to the inside of the shoe. So here I am on the outside. Now I have that thread on the inside, and I have 2 more stitches just to tie it off. Little tiny ones that I take my needle back through so that it can tie it off nice and tight. Cut that off, and the shoe is all done. So I have these ribbons and elastics at the seam, right in the middle. It should be right in the middle of your foot when you put the shoe on, and the 2 elastics sewed to the outside of the heel on the back. Thank you very much.